Hey guys, all right. So today we are looking at the artist Tyler James. I came across this guy just recently flipping through ArtStation, and his work really jumped out to me because he's got all the principles that we always talk about on this channel, like really strong composition and really good design and rendering. Like this guy, he really does a lot of things very, very well. And so I think he's somebody to look at in terms of somebody that you can learn a lot from. Like I say all the time on this channel in this Illustration Masterclass series, what we're doing is we're really looking at a lot of different stuff and allowing it to kind of seep into our subconscious. You know, I'm trying to learn a new language right now. I'm trying to learn Japanese because I want to go to Japan and actually be able to speak Japanese. And one of the things it is that I've realized is an effective way of teaching or an effective way of learning is this idea of just exposure. You know, obviously you need to study and you need to actually do things like vocabulary and grammar and things like that, but you also need a lot of exposure to the language. And that's really the way it is that I think of learning art. It's like you need to get exposure to why it is that things work. And if you can take the things it is that I'm mentioning here and then look at your favorite artists and kind of pick at them and say like, oh, okay, like I see what it is that he's saying. I see the same artist doing this, or I see the same artist doing that. Then you're going to level up your skills really quickly, because it's really, a lot of it comes down to the creative decisions it is that they're making, right? So if I take this image, and I've talked about this so many times, if I take this image and I make it smaller, we can start to see that this is what the thumbnail looked like, right? When he was just doing a little sketch for this client, he came up with a few different thumbnails, and this is clearly what it is that it looked like whenever it was like a very small thumbnail sketch, right? He was going for readability at a very small level, meaning that he's got these big dynamic shapes at play, which the rule is that if it's readable at this size, then it's only going to look better the bigger it is that we get the image, right? So let's dig into it and let's look at some different things, right? So talking about this idea of if the image is very small and it's still readable and it's still compelling, then that means it's gonna work. It's gonna work as an image. So that tells you that the majority of the work that is accomplished by an illustration is something like, you could say, the first 20% of something, right? So the majority of the lifting will be done by the first 20% of the work it is that you produce, right? Because if you think about it, if you don't know what it is that it's going to look like whenever you draw the whole thing out, then you could spend so much time on an illustration and you get close to the end of it and you don't even know if it works anymore. Like, please tell me, if you're an artist and you do this sort of thing, do you have that happen to you? Do you get, 60, 70% along the way or about half of the way, and then all of a sudden everything falls apart? It's probably because the composition wasn't figured out before it is that you jumped into it, right? So whenever we're thinking about, well, how do they make these compositions work? Again, we just expose ourselves to the very basic principles. And I'm going to break them down, but I'm going to break them down by looking at it in grayscale, just because it's going to be a little bit easier because I've got a red pen here to draw all over. So I've mentioned this before, we have these different quadrants of a page, right? And if you put something directly right down in the middle, it's going to look boring unless you have something over here or down here that's kind of throwing off the symmetry. Now, this is an exception, and I'm going to get into a number of reasons as to why that is. But we can say that this is pretty much straight in the middle, but really it's not, because of the pose that this figure is coming in with, right? This figure has this pose that is coming in strong, and it's coming in from this direction, or you could say from the background to the foreground, whereas this character is going from the foreground to the background, right? They're meeting each other in the midground, essentially, right? But you can see in all these different ways in which it is that he guides the eye and keeps the image entertaining, right? So he's got this rule of scale, right? To make something feel dramatic, you want scale. So in order to make this feel like an epic battle, he's got a couple of different things it is that he's doing. He's creating a sense of contrast and scale with this figure here and with this huge figure back here, right? He's creating this sense of contrast between these two figures. Okay, the other thing it is that he's doing that is creating this sense of drama is that he's illustrating what we see in a lot of different Frazetta pieces, which has become kind of a golden rule of like fantasy illustrations, is that you illustrate the moment right before something is going to happen, right? And that invites your imagination into the illustration, because we don't know what it is that happens. You know, does she win or does he win? We don't know. It's a question. Whenever it is that you illustrate something right before it happened or right after something happened, you're inviting the viewer in to put their own imagination onto the illustration. Right? So if I take these quadrants away, we can see a lot of other things it is that are going on that are very subtle but are very useful for any artist, any illustrator. For one thing, you'll see that there's these kind of grayed out or these blurred out parts of the foreground here, right? And so that makes it feel like there's a lot of depth to the illustration. Anytime you have something that's real close to the camera and then creating this kind of blur, it gives it a cinematic feel. It just automatically makes it feel very cinematic, because that's something it is that you only get with cameras, right? We don't really have that whenever we're actually looking through our eyes normally, right? And then as far as everything else goes, you have these kind of arching lines here that keep your eye from drifting off away from the main illustration. But notice that, again, like I've mentioned many times before, you see it's following the same arc as the major forms in the piece. You've got this thing that's back here. I don't know what this is, if it's its tail or some other weapon. But it's following the same trajectory all the way around. And if you were to look at this from this point of view, you could say that this is like a big circle. All these different forms are kind of implying a circle that is surrounding these two figures, right? And we see what it is we've talked about here before, where we have this nice silhouette that overlaps with other figures, right? So you have this very straight line, which is, I think this is really interesting because I don't really see this that often, is you have basically what looks like a straight line that's going from right here basically to her breast, right? It's going right here, and you could say in a sense it carries through to the sword, right? We see that there's a strong gesture in the legs as well. This kind of gesture where her chest is going out towards him, and then we're seeing the opposite with him, right? And we've got this kind of back and forth sort of thing going on. Both of their right arms are positioned, but they're positioned, since they're facing one another, they're positioned in different ways, right? So let me back out of that so we can take a look at it again without that. So yeah, there's other things it is that you can see here. He's got like lots of different effects and things going on, and lots of very strong understanding of color theory. But my concern when I look at something like this is looking at and understanding his composition, because his composition is it's so strong. Let's go ahead and move on to the next one. I believe this one was called the Labyrinth Guardian or something like that. I just really dig this piece. I really dig these illustrations that guys do nowadays, where it's this dark fantasy style, but it's kind of done in this like kind of cinematic kind of style, right? Like I said, these very big 16 by 19 ratio illustrations done horizontally, and they look like they're something that are for a film or for a game that has never been made. But you can see he's got a lot of really good design sensibilities to him. You know, he's got the wings, he's got these kind of strange arches on her feet, which I think is really what makes the character stand out. You know, there's always one or two elements that you can always tell when an artist has their own voice versus whenever it is that they're just copying somebody, because you get these kind of weird little affects that I wouldn't have seen with somebody else. And I think the way that he illustrated this and the way that he's kind of suggesting this atmosphere back here with all of these labyrinth of cubes that go into the distance, and this kind of question of like, what is she actually doing? What is she fighting against, right? These all kind of suggest a story that is larger than the individual illustration. This one I thought, this is probably my favorite one that I came across of his, because it feels like the old dark fantasy stuff I grew up looking at, and the artists that I looked at, like Raposa and Dan Warren and people like that, that really did a really nice job with the dark fantasy stuff. But I thought the image over here was a little dark, and so I decided to do a red trace over and pull it over here to the side so we could get a better idea of what it is that we're looking at. You know, we can see that in a sense he's kind of doing the same thing it is that you see whenever you do, you know, I've talked about this whenever you do comic books, right? Like if you have a comic book panel like this, and then you have a character kind of popping out of the panel, and how dynamic it is that it can make it feel, especially if you have other panels that just have, you know, normal characters doing normal things, but you have this one up here, and this guy's popping out of the panel in some weird way. It makes the illustration feel very dynamic, and in a lot of ways I feel like he's able to create that effect here in a very subtle way, because we have this rectangular shape that is the frame of the illustration, right? Is this vertical rectangular shape, but then he has another vertical rectangular shape inside the illustration itself, and then he's breaking it with these silhouettes, right? So he's got this form, and then he's breaking it with these two figures here. And notice that the gestures, you know, I talk about this a lot. The gesture can communicate so much. The gestures are moving in opposite directions. They're swaying in two different directions. I also notice, you know, we've kind of got the same sort of hair thing going on here, right? With this creepy tombs robe covering one side of its face. It's very reminiscent of what it is that we see here. But it's also there's also other things that are reminiscent and kind of repeat throughout the illustration, such as this bat wings kind of dress thing she's got, which is just it's really cool. I love the design of this. I love his design skills. I feel like this is definitely a repeat. It is that we see here, right? And then of course he brings in, which I didn't even see this before, he's got this very faint tree back here, you know, and you can see whenever you add something in the background that has a very that is very close in values. Like if I make this black and white, and well, I kind of messed up because I drew over that. Let me see here. Back out of that. Let's make this black and white, and let's take a look. So when you look at this illustration in black and white, it can kind of it can kind of become very obvious in a way that it wasn't in color, that he's got a lot of different value ranges going on in the area to the top left, right? In a way it is that we might not even realize. Like the contrast of the value ranges is obviously in our focal point, which is going to be in this area right here. But he still explores all the different value ranges throughout the piece and the background. And then again, we have that same thing it is that I was talking about before. You have this foreground element where it's very blurred out, and it gives it this cinematic feel to it, and it makes it feel like there's depth to it, you know. So we have this background element here, and then we have this midground illustration that's sitting right in the middle, and then we've got foreground elements as well. All right, I think we got one more, and then we'll go ahead and we'll call it. This one is this one I really picked it because not because it's a thirst trap or anything like that, but because it's so beautiful with the color range, right? Like he's got this great use of color. And so if we start picking out these colors and start bringing them over here, we can start to see how he's able to build these bridges between these different colors. Because from my eyes, it looks like the colors are all over the place, right? At first glance, that's what it looks like. But I don't believe that it is. I believe that there is some rhyme to the process. I believe there is some point to this, right? And see, what's interesting is that the closer it is that I get to the bottom of the page, in a lot of ways, it's much more desaturated than what it is that I expected, right? I expect this color to be way more saturated than what it's actually coming out as. So he's still following the same rule of keeping the saturation where it is that he wants it. And then he lets everything else, even though he's got this color range to it, he's letting everything else fall into the background, right? But he's clearly using this light. He's got this light coming through here and hitting the side of her head, and it's creating this nice light layer over here, right? And then you've got this great design of this horned helmet thing. And then you've got this hand over here. Really cool. And just overall, it's got a great setup in terms of the way it is that he's using these other elements to pull your eye in. And then he's got these little background elements that add some story to it, but he lets them sit way, way back in the distance. He doesn't just leave the background open completely as just an abstract color, but he puts something back there to ground it into a reality, into a universe, and to let your imagination kind of fill in the gaps of what it is that, what kind of environment she's standing in. All right, guys, that's what I got for you. If you would like to support what I do here on this channel, that would be pretty awesome. You can check out my Buy Me a Coffee and my Patreon, which is going to have more exclusive content in the link below. I also have my own web store where I've got prints and my own art and stuff like that, if you want to check that out, and my social media. I also included Tyler's social media and his art station and whatever I could find of him. I included that down in the link below, so make sure to check that out. Thank you guys so much, and take care.